Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. Everyone, welcome back to Nets in the Water. Today we have Bob Lesnefsky. There we go. We got it. Super excited about it. This was kind of a last-minute thing, and I'm really excited about it. I'm really happy to have you on. Thank you for coming on here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The couch is so comfy.
Dude, these couches are nice.
Really
yeah.
nice.
This chair was the biggest acquisition for the podcast. We had that couch.
Okay.
And we were like, well, we need a matching chair. This was huge.
Yeah, I was hoping I could have sat in the chair, but it's fine. This couch is fine.
We can switch halfway. It's
Okay.
like it's like
All
tennis.
right.
We'll switch sides halfway through the podcast. We'll be good to go.
Nice.
So I can give you a little bit breakdown about what you do, but also I'd love for you to chime in because you've worn a lot of hats throughout your time in just the Catholic space. Catholic rapper, a youth minister, currently at Franciscan University, working at director of was it housing evangelization? Evangelization. There it is. You had 9 kids, correct?
7.
7. Dang it.
It doesn't matter. After 3, it feels like 9. It doesn't
Same
matter.
number.
Yeah.
I mean, you got enough for a starting basketball lineup with some subs,
Yeah, that's right, dude.
which is huge.
After 3, your life is ruined, so it doesn't really matter how many you have. You might as well have 16.
16. There it is.
Am I right, Kat?
Cat gets it. Cat gets it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, just a man who's been deeply in the trenches of evangelization for a long period of time now. You started when you were about 4 years old, I assume.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, yeah. I love evangelization. It's definitely it's all I've ever done in the sense of you know, like what have you done with your life? You know, like it's I feel like it's I don't know, not always, you know, professionally the first choice of a lot of people, but for me it's just kind of what has always had my heart. I feel like it's what I've either been good at or drawn to, and so I feel like whether it's in different corners of evangelization or what, I feel like it's always kind of been you know, like did nonprofit work for most of my professional life with inner city kids, and then did some music stuff, and now I'm at Franciscan, and love it.
So you, right out of college, did you start? I also forgot to say in the intro, you founded, is it Vagabond Ministries?
Vagabond Missions.
Yeah. Vagabond Missions. Did you start that right out of college, or was that?
Well, we didn't start the nonprofit right out of college, but that's when me and my wife moved to New York right after college, and we were at a little inner city parish there, and that's really where we fell in love with inner city ministry, and also where we were just, you know, kind of becoming aware of, man, like there's some pockets of culture that the church is not touching, you know, and it was, you know, it was like a mix of frustrating and miraculous. It was like, you know, like a very weird thing. But eventually I feel like it scarred us enough that we're like, man, we just want to do this. And so, yeah, we eventually founded the nonprofit. But in the beginning, we were just at a little parish, and then realized most inner city places don't have the resources or the people or whatever to kind of do it. And we just decided, like, let's just kind of do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think that the beauty of frustration there too is, like, I feel like there's a level of frustration in a lot of saints' stories, even just like you get frustrated enough with some reality of what ends up being the evil one, of just what ends up being corruption in the world, and it pivots. And then you mentioned also just the culture side of that ministry.
Yeah, even before we started with the nonprofit full time. I was doing the music stuff, the hip hop, and a quote that actually Father Stan Fortuna, I don't know if you know, he is a CFR, but he did, I mean, he still does music, but he's eccentric stuff, you know, kind of all over the place. But he did some rap and stuff like that, but he loves St. John Paul II, and he shared this quote with me that said, if the church holds back from culture, the gospel falls silent. And I just, man, that was really, one, it was really motivating for me, and two, it was like a get out of jail free card, because, you know, someone would be like, oh, why are you doing hip hop? That's weird to do Catholic hip hop, or why do you have tattoos, or why do you have that? You know, it's always like, well, John Paul II said, like, don't hold back from culture, you know,
Yeah.
and that the Spirit needs to breathe into that. So, yeah, so culture is always, for me, it's always been a big draw. It's probably the thing I like the most about evangelization. And when you look at the history of the church, saints and stuff like that, people that did it best were not the people that sidestep culture or tried to just make everyone do it exactly like they were doing it, you know, but they're the saints that embrace culture, that got to, really know the culture that they were ministering to, and allowed Christ to breathe into that culture. You know, like there's a reason that, you know, Mary or Jesus, when, you know, they appear to people around the world, they look like them. You know, they don't look like white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. And, it's because, like, the Lord, you know, the Holy Spirit is, breathed into culture. And so, yeah, I do love that part of evangelization.
Pope Benedict XVI, who said, like, for as many souls as there are that many ways the Lord will encounter us, or that many different avenues for evangelization.
I never heard that. That's good.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me of that, where it's like, yeah, the way, like, the Lord appears to us as we need him. And I just think it's a beautiful reality. Within that culture, though, I always have had, I guess personally, even a rough time navigating this idea of, like, being in the world and not of it. Mm-hmm. How have you been able to manage embracing the culture and being a part of the culture while still not becoming maybe, like I'd say, invested in or, like, captured by?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's everyone's struggle to a certain degree, right? Because, I mean, I think it seems more exaggerated. Like, well, how do you do that? Like, how could you do rap and not promote rap? Or how can you do? But I mean, like, there should be a tension there in everyone's lives, but in their very lives, the way they live. But for most people, it's not. You know, we don't even really stand out from other people anymore. Like, if you just, you know, is that person a Christian? Or is that person a Christian? You know, it's like we watch the same shows, we do the same things, we spend our money the same way. So the weird thing is that tension, I think, is absent from a lot of people in the church. You know, it's just like, I don't think God wants us to just live lives exactly like everyone else with just a little, you know, Jesus sprinkled over the top. I mean, really, I think that's like a core question we probably all need to ask. But, like, when it comes to culture, I feel like I don't really, worry about, is this, I mean, obviously there's, you know, if you have a formed conscience and you're, following the Lord, I think for the most part, you're not going to step on the landmines of, you know, I'm not going to use bad language or promote bad, but there are going to be people. And I think there's probably elements, honestly, of like a subtle, prejudice or there's probably some weird elements, you know, because there have been times, like, where I've had people that were just upset they're doing anything with this type of music or this type of beat or and I feel like there's like, well, why would the beat itself be intrinsically bad? Or again, these are the biggest missteps in church history, is when we've demonized culture. And we said, oh, no, this is different than us, and so it must be evil. Mm-hmm. And that's a big, I think now when we study catechetics and evangelization, history of church, you know, we see, like, wow, that's not how God, that's not how God works. But yeah, so I guess to circle back to your original question, is just, I think that's a tension that should exist everywhere. But I think, like, when it comes to stepping into the culture, it's kind of like, I let God sort out, how he wants to work there. Like, I don't think there's a danger of, like, I am introducing the youth to pop culture. They're already in pop culture. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I think, like, with that assumption, you're like, if anything, we're just, allowing Christ to step into this space. And, I'm not worried so much about it promoting the culture, especially if the heart of what you're doing is speaking truth and introducing, making an introduction to God and the church. I think the danger is, like, probably alleviated a little bit.
Yeah,
if that
and
makes sense.
It doesn't. Because also, like, the truth of the gospel itself is that Jesus took what was there and made it something, like he sanctified it. He made it something holy. Like, he took the reality of sin and he made it something that, like, isn't, now it's not holy to sin, but he was able to redeem it. But in that way, like, we're able to take culture and sanctify it, make it holy.
Working at a college, I've noticed this weird tension where young people, who have a natural draw to whether it's pop culture or just youth culture, whatever, almost as they're experiencing conversion in their heart, they have I should, anything that resembles popular culture or the world, like, I'm going to just push it all off to the side, and the only thing I will embrace is long jean skirts and oatmeal, and everything else is evil. And I think, like, that's just a knee-jerk thing, just for us to be like, well, if this is something I like, or if it's something the world likes, or if it's something popular, like, it must be evil. Like, and that's just not the case. You know what I mean? And actually, it's a really freeing thing to realize, what, like, the Lord oftentimes moves in culture or our own landscape, in ways and in things that just, resonate with us. And I think it's a misunderstanding of God to think anything that we enjoy, he must want the opposite. Like, it's like when you're a young person and you're trying to discern, like, am I going to be married, a priest, or whatever, it's like, the thing I would always think was just, well, I kind of want to be married, so I'm assuming God wants me to be a priest. Like I'm evil. Like,
your
he wants the opposite of what I want, because this is what I like. And when actually in reality, it's like, no, most of the time, God's will, like, he works through your desires.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. I think, like, when it comes to culture and that kind of thing, is that being of the world, not being in the world, not of the world, is some of it is like I don't think we have to be as afraid, if we're in prayer, if we're in the sacraments, if we have people that surround us that are, helping us with, accountability, or just, checking, ourselves, I think it's less of a danger than maybe we fear,
Well, within that, how are you able to both be in the culture and both, like, kind of fit in a sense, but also still be, like, noticeably, like, Catholic? I think, was it St. Francis who was, like, one of the preach the gospel at all times, one necessary, use words?
Yeah.
I could be totally wrong on who said
that.
Yeah,
no, that is, he's attributed to that. I'm at a Franciscan college, Steubenville, and for whatever reason, the people always make note that they're like, that was actually never Francis who said that. Like, it was always attributed to him, but no one knows who said that. So I have no idea. But point being, it's that quote, it's a really powerful concept, just this idea that, like, so how do you do it? How do you witness with with not being of the world? So I don't know, I feel like it's different for different people, like I don't know that I do fit in with the popular. I'm old. You know what I mean? So it's like my time is past. I don't fit in. They're like, the only thing is, like, I have tattoos, and so people.
I feel like you're cooler than me, no doubt. So you have
no way, dude. No way.
Have that beat.
No way. But people be like, oh, you're relevant. You're like, no, I just have a bunch of tattoos, And so I think the key to anyone doing good evangelization, specifically witness, like. One of the, if I was better, I'd major in catechetics, but one of the Vatican II documents say that, the world will much, maybe it, dude, but will much more readily follow a witness than they will a teacher. And if they follow a teacher, it's only because they were first a witness. That's the quote.
Yeah.
I think, like, if we're talking about, okay, what's the best way to evangelize, catechize, whatever? It's a witness, and the best way to do witness is to be authentically you, what I mean? And so even when I'm, doing training, I still help with training with Vagabond missions in the summer. One of the first things is just, like, you don't have to be we're not going to take you to like cool class, where we teach you how to like, hang out with inner city kids. Just like all people really want is just you to be authentically you. You know what I mean? If you have weird interests and, whatever, you dress weird, just be you. You know what I mean? And I feel like people respond really well to authenticity. You know what I mean? So again, I think that's kind of freeing, you know what I mean? Because it's saying like, you don't have to put on an act, it's just to be relevant. All you need to do to be relevant is be authentic, and the Lord somehow moves through that.
Yeah, it's something I've realized a lot while in college. Because I think in middle school and in high school, there's a level of like, unless you do certain things, you're not cool.
Yeah.
But now I'm realizing in college, like everyone who's cool are just people who are like confident with what they're doing. I have a friend, I won't name him. Everyone who knows me knows exactly what I'm talking about, where it's like, he's no doubt the coolest guy we all know.
Rob Reynolds.
Yeah, exactly. You get it.
Yeah, I got it.
It's the knee cut shorts.
Yeah,
that really do it for him. No, it's just like he just does things, and like to him, it's sick, and it just becomes cool.
Yeah, cool.
And I think it's a reality of like college culture now. I don't know everywhere, but I'm at a public university, and like the people that I see, and I'm like, dang, that person's probably really sick, are the people who look a little bit weird and are just stupid confident with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, you're cool now. Like you're sick.
Yeah. And but that just it goes to show you that like, man, it's to be holy, to make a difference, to stand out, to whatever, it's not, there's not a formula. It's if there is a formula, it's just, like be authentically you and be good at it, and let the Lord work through that, and I feel like those are the times that work, because it's believable, because it's, there's a confidence. It's that natural thing that you see with those kids at college. I feel like God blesses that in a supernatural way even more when you're like, I can embrace who I am first and foremost because I'm loved by God. And that to me, I feel like is the most awesome thing. It's the most attractive thing, I think, to the world, is like just this idea that you're loved perfectly and you don't need to really worry about much. God'll take care of the rest. Yeah.
No, I just think that that's such a reality in terms of like being comfortable with diversity. I want to say there's some quote of like where the church allows for us to be diverse, we ought to be diverse. Like where the church doesn't give us a rule, we should not pretend like there's some rule. The church has never said you're not allowed to listen to metal music as a genre. So we should we should have some people who enjoy it. That's okay. And I think there's going back to the idea of like being in the world and not of it, or like preach the gospel at all times, use words. Like people assume that what that means is like be like, I guess the difference between like, they think it means be anti-culture, whereas the reality is just be counterculture. Like counter the culture where it needs to be, but it doesn't mean you need to hate the culture. You don't need to pretend like wearing 5-inch inseam shorts to the beach with a dude means he's being immodest. Like we can just do things that are normal for people that are not inherently sinful, and just let it happen. And I also understand the aversion to it, I suppose.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. I think it's just, like I said, it just goes back to, I think just that we just don't trust ourselves so much. It's a lot of so many things in our lives. It stems back to, I think, sometimes an incorrect understanding of God. Like I always talk to, I'm talking to young people about God's love. Like I think there's this kind of deductive thinking that it's like, God hates sin, I sin, so God probably hates me. And we don't ever say that, but it's like, I know God loves me, but you're like, if I really stop and think about it, he's probably pretty mad at me. What I mean? It's like, just because we know the bad things we do, the thoughts we have, and so we just have this like intrinsic aversion to like ourselves even, and in that, like, we have this incorrect view that God is first and foremost, kind of disappointed with us or something, and so I think that reflects on the way that we do ministry, or don't do ministry, hold back from ministry. So I think it's a good point.
And within that ministry too, I mean, this is something that I'm really not witness to, that I'm not happy to say, but I'm not, of like the interplay of of culture in like poorer communities, in less privileged communities.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen that like tie in and like play together?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting is culturally, you know, the places that are struggling the most with the church are places where white people are. You know what I mean? Like the places that like the church is doing the best is where there's black people and Hispanic people, you know, like, and it's like those, it's really thriving, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so I do think sometimes people are surprised when I'm talking to them about, oh, we do Catholic inner city ministry, and they'll be like, oh, do they like that? You know, like, do they like the church, or they're surprised when I was like, oh yeah, we have take buses of kids to mass or adoration and stuff like that. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is, you know, I have, you know, some godsons that are black, and, you know, one of the things that, and this will get back to your question a little bit more specifically, but, you know, they're sometimes there'll be a little bit of pushback, like, oh, well, you know, is this the white man's church? Or, you know, like they'll have like some people ask, and I would just say like, no, you know, like there's even a part of Jesus, you know, like who, you know, spent time growing up in Africa, and, you know, like in some, you know, of our early church fathers, and, you know, and even now, like where you see, yeah, like some of the church thriving, it's in very cultural places, and where we're embracing that part of the culture. And so I would say, you know, how do I see it working in the communities we work? I see it being really powerful, because I think, you know, Catholic being universal, and the Catholic faith lived out well is, like we've been talking about, is the Lord stepping into culture, is the Lord embracing people where they're at, you know, both physically and, you know, like internally, and so yeah, we have it's wild, but there's, you know, hundreds, like we've had almost 300 kids like baptized into the church, and wow. and it's they'll say stuff like, man, I just I love when I go to like, it's things like you wouldn't expect. Like I was interviewing these girls this one time, like, just tell me what you like about like mass or the church or whatever. And this one girl's like, man, when you go to the Catholic church, they're not all judgmental like other churches. Like, man, not everyone would like say these things, because like I think sometimes, you know, we see things like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be boring or weird for them, but like there's just an element of beauty in just the simplistic truth that, you know, God is present in the Eucharist, and they're drawn to that holiness, to even where like, you know, most of the kids like we bring with us to either mass or retreats or whatever, they're 90% of them aren't Catholic unless a couple of them became Catholic, you know. And so, I mean, we were at this retreat a few years ago, and this kid was telling me at the end of the night, we had adoration, and he was like, man, when he's like, that one guy was walking around with that gold thing tonight, oh, that was so cool. Like, he's like, I just felt like God was talking, you know, but he didn't know it was a priest. He didn't know it was the Eucharist. He didn't understand the monstrance, you know, like, so that, but there's like an inherent, like, you know, reality to just, this is true, and this is beautiful.
It's childlike.
Yeah.
It's beautifully childlike.
Yeah.
And this idea of, like you mentioned earlier, of meeting them where they're at is another thing within the church that I think we've kind of taken advantage of. This idea, like we almost, like I think we misuse it. Like for lack of a kinder term, it's kind of a bastardized term of like, we assume it just means like letting some stuff slide.
Yeah.
And it's like the analogy that I've always used is like, if you and I were trying to go to dinner and you were at your house, I was at my house, and you were like, and I was like, oh dude, I don't have a car. Like, can you take me there? And you just came over to my house to meet me, and then you're like, you just never took me to dinner. It's like that was useless.
Yeah.
Like you met me where I was, but we didn't go anywhere. That was like, why did you even come here? And you're someone that's met many people where they're at. How have you been able to meet people where they're at while still taking them to the proverbial restaurant, like taking them to that final place?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough, because I think, like, so I just took a I always say, like, you know, people are like, do you have your master's? I say, like, well, I started it, but I just took one class a few years ago, and I got an A in it for the record, but okay, I just was good. Like, I'm not taking any more of these. You know, it's just, I'm too old for this. And, but the class was in RCIA, and it was one of the things that we spent a lot of time on is, you know, realizing that God reveals himself, and the church catechizes, they say, two things: slow and in stages. And I would say, you know, like just in a more like regular terminology, I would say slow and messy. And so I think that those, like, when you realize like these are the two markers of real evangelization, slow and messy, you know, it again, it goes back to this concept of freedom within evangelization. But it does kind of take away some of the, you don't have to have a silver bullet answer or a Scott Hahn book memorized in order to evangelize your neighbor or your sister-in-law or something. You know what I mean? Like the best way to evangelize is just through real life and commitment of time. You know what I mean? So some of these kids that like we meet where they're at, you know, like some of the reason that they eventually end up being open to coming to the Lord is because we've been working with the same kid for 6 years, you know, then they're like, I'll come to mass now, you know, like, or like, I totally trust you. Like, let's, go a little deeper into this thing. And like, I've experienced that a lot. And so I think for me, you know, just resting in that idea of like, you know, the slow and messy this is par for the course with the church, and this is par for the course with catechesis or evangelization. You know, to me, it's all about like taking the pressure off of, I am not God. I am not, you know, I don't have the pressure to convert you or to change your heart. Yeah. Just like, okay, yeah, I'm going to be available, but the rest of it is like, however God wants to do it. Maybe I'm not going to be the guy that is, you know, brings this guy to the Lord, you know, but, I can, you know, embrace him, and I can encounter him in a real way where he, you know, is seen and he's loved and he feels accepted. And maybe that's just the beginning step for him to actually come into a church or to be open to learning more, you know? Yeah. So yeah, for me, it's an easy thing because it's like very freeing to just like, I'm going to encounter someone where they're at. And to just like, whether I'm the guy I take them to the restaurant or it's going to be someone else, I don't really care. I know that the Lord is faithful. So,
and I think we also have a luxury of that as lay people, where it's like our job is to be witnesses, and that's it. And being a witness does not mean like poking and prodding and like, and because there's that big difference between like, as a father, you have a much different role of evangelization.
Sure.
To my understanding, I'm not a father, but my understanding of it is like as a father, you do have a direct responsibility of like, no, like we go to mass as a family. We're going to pray as a family. Yeah. Whereas like as a layperson evangelist, you have the privilege of being like, hey, I'm going to invite you to it, and I'm going to continue to do it and be bold with it. And similarly, like as a priest, as a shepherd, they also can't really just be like mildly suggestive about when they're like what holiness is going to happen, and then keep it moving. Like as shepherds, they have a responsibility. We get to be in this privileged place of just being close with and witnessing to people, and like whatever else happens. And yeah, like it's able to be a really freeing, beautiful place of like, oh, I'm not I'm not responsible for this person's soul. I just get to journey with their soul. Like I get to experience it and I get to evangelize and witness to it. But it's not on my like it's not like a reality that like I'm accountable for this person's soul.
Yeah. I mean, so I have, you know, a pretty big staff that works for me at Steubenville. And, you know, one of the things, like when we do training or we talk about like our core values, who we are, our playbook, like how do we do stuff? You know, the main thing we go back to all the time is just, if you want to be good at evangelization, just be good at hanging out with people. You don't have to, I'd take any day, you know, someone who was just fun to hang out with and, you know, good at hanging out over someone who knew the catechism of the Bible, because I feel like that's such an entry point for everyone. Even if you look at, you know, okay, well, how, you know, because there's a million books, right, on like how to do ministry or how to do youth ministry, evangelization, catechesis, you know, faith formation, all these different things, but if we just were like, well, what if God himself came to earth and he did evangelization? Like, what would he do? And like, well, he actually did that, and so we could look at like how God did it. And the way he did it was he came to earth, he became one of us. And for 30 years, he just hung out. You know what I mean? Like, yes, there were some, moments in there, especially those last 3 years where it was just, all truth all the time, but like over 90% of his life was just being with people, working, living, eating, doing normal things. And so I think what that shows us is, like we have this access point, which is actually much more normal than I think we give evangelization credit for, is just, hey, the way to reach out to your neighbor is just by spending time with them, is just by being approachable, is by, learning who they are and sharing your heart. And eventually it's like in friendship, we begin to share hearts with each other. And, so I do think it's kind of a cool, understanding that like it's a freeing thing that evangelization comes down, first and foremost to being available and to allowing the Lord to work however he wants to work, but like, I think the first step is oftentimes the hardest, because a lot of times the first step that, people that are doing, evangelization want to do is, we'll knock on people's door and ask them if they know Jesus, it's like 9 times out of 10, someone's going to shut that door in your face and think the church is really weird, but you know what, if you ask someone if they want to eat a hamburger with you, 9 times out of 10, they'll say like, yeah, and that's a very normal way to do evangelization, and it's a lifelong model that will work anywhere.
But so how do you balance this like reality of like journeying and it's slow and it's messy, but also keep in line like the urgency of like the kingdom, that like while we can't force it and we can't just like fire hose them, we also can't just be like, yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Well, I think like it all comes back to having a life that's rooted in prayer. Like I think if you are trying to do ministry and you're not praying and you're just hanging out, I mean, then obviously you're just hanging out. You're like just a good friend to a lot of people. But I think if you're living life, however, whatever that entails, and you're praying and you're bringing your life, and you're bringing your heart, you're bringing your family, you're bringing your work, you're bringing these relationships before the Lord, well, all of a sudden, like, the Lord allows opportunities, and doors to kind of be opened, but also just brings things or people to the forefront. Like I know with me, like that's something that I see all the time in my life. There'll be someone that just, the Lord is really putting in my heart in a special way. And I think, what, I need to lean into that, or like I think this part of where I'm at in this relationship with this person is time for me. I've earned my right to be heard, so to speak. And I'm gonna challenge them a little bit, but I think there's soft ways into that, like where, like for me, like thinking about like someone who's completely unchurched, like as opposed to a college student, I'm with her or something now, an easy way to just, before you leave hanging out with them is just say, hey, is there anything I could pray for you for? And then eventually, can we pray right now? Like, let's just pray for that before you leave, like, but it's not, it's not a bait and switch where you're acting like you don't love God. And then all of a sudden you're like, I have a secret to tell you. I love God. And what I mean? So it's like, you're authentically sharing, who you are, because that I think is authentic witness, like we talked about earlier. But I think that there's subtle ways to begin to share that in a little bit more, in a little bit more explicit way. And then I think the rest of it with the urgency you're talking about comes down to, continuing to take, what you're doing and to take these people, to prayer. And you ask the Lord in the morning, hey, Lord, whatever doors you want to open up for me today, I'm going to walk through them, and I'm ready to say, here I am. So.
Yeah, it's something that I've always had, I mean, even personally, frankly, a struggle with balancing, because it's like like Paul says, like race so as to win or run so as to win. Like I should be with these people so as to like bring Jesus to them, but also I should be doing it in a way that's like prudent.
Yeah. And it really is hard. It's hard to say like, this is when you do it, this is when you don't. I mean, it really, but I think if you take away the pressure of like, oh, geez, I better get this done. The Lord is probably annoyed, with the way I'm doing this or something. And then all of a sudden you're just like, okay, I things take a lifetime. Like I was telling you earlier, like sometimes, like there's a specific guy who was baptized into the church, and he came around like our inner city ministry for 6 years. Like he would never go on retreat with us. He would get free food. He'd hang out on our nights. He was fun, all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't until he was out of high school. It was like he's like, hey, I was wondering, like, could you like show me like a book or something that like I can get a little bit more of this, because like recently, like I've just been like feeling like I really want to like know more about what it is we've been talking about, and it was really cool, because I don't want to say I gave up, but like in my mind I was like, oh dude, we would try 6 years for this guy to really break through, and and I want to be not resigned but resolved to the fact that like whether or not someone comes to church with me or not, I'm still going to love them. I'm still going to, I could be Christ to them, even if they don't ever step into the church. They can encounter Christ just in the way that I love them. Mm-hmm. And, but it was kind of cool to see that, man, sometimes it takes a long time, and that's the norm. There are some times, man, you're like, someone will be like, I sat next to this person on the plane and they were crying by the end of the ride and we prayed together. So like, yeah, those things happen, but it's like, that's the rarity, like, or sharing your faith with your waiter and it everything changes, like that's like super rare and miraculous. But like the norm is just like over a long period of time, someone, they remember that, oh yeah, and I remember Bob like said he'll pray for me or something, and then he asked a question, and so I think it is good to keep the urgency in mind, because it is, it isn't, just kind of a nice, sprinkling to our lives. It's life itself, but at the same time, I think it sure is freeing to know that the Lord has a plan, and I'm not the only person that he's using. There's lots of people that he's using.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, the piece in like the length of time that it takes really ends up just taking a lot of trust in the Lord, that like his time is where it all works on. And I guess, on the point of the urgency, this is something I want to talk about. We can not go into, or we can cut it out. But I was basically, in terms of urgency, just with life, this is a very trivial thing for me. Like last year, 2 years ago, I had hernia surgery, and I was in the hospital, and I was just kind of like, dang, it's so weird that like it was the first time I was like, dang, bodies just break, like humans just malfunction sometimes, and it isn't for granted. And there are people in here who are having like some of the most tragic, important days of their lives, and it's really just crazy. I'm curious if, or how at all, in 2009, your medical complications, like you had was it a few strokes?
Yeah, a bunch of strokes.
Like how that affected your own timeline of evangelization and your own journey with all
that's
this.
A deep question, man. You're like waiting to like gut punch me till the end.
Yeah, we had to get him in the water. It's the frog in the water.
You reeled me in with the hernia thing. Like, I had a hernia. What about your stroke?
Yeah, and also life-threatening. Yeah, exactly. It's like I also had a mild inconvenience. Let's talk about your thing.
Man, that's a really good question. I don't talk about my strokes quite as much anymore, because it's a long time ago, man. Yeah. It's probably the year you were born, bro. But I mean, it changed my life, dude, in so many good ways. So one of the things was, back then I was doing music. My main source of income, like what I was doing the most was music, and it was it was gospel hip hop. It was stuff for the church, and but I mean, I think part of doing gigs for a living, like whether you're a professional speaker or musician or whatever, like there's a part of it that's very you know, it's wrapped up in self-promotion. That was also on like the front end of a lot of, you know, like I had MySpace, you know, and you don't even know what MySpace is. It was like,
I've heard legends.
It was before like Instagram and, you know, all the multiverse of, you know, kind of self-awareness, self-promotion, social media stuff now. But I think one of the things that was cool about like when that stroke happened for me is, you know, it really messed me up. Like, I think in terms of, you know, I like asked myself all these questions, you know, like, why am I lovable to God? You know, like, and this is very, I want to say heavy, but it's like very internal, you know, like, so if you say like, man, I feel like I'm valuable to God because I build churches, if that's what you did. Well, what if you lost your arms, you know, then you're like, man, well, what makes me valuable to God? Like, you know, I used to be like really good at building churches, and now I can't do nothing, you know, like, and there's this part of you, or part of me, like at that time, I think, where I lost a lot of my abilities. Like, I lost my sight, and then I was paralyzed on one side for a while. I couldn't talk I was in the hospital for a while, and immediately I pulled out of like, you know, traveling, touring, that kind of thing. And, you know, just asked all these introspective questions of, I think the Lord was like, why do you love me? You know, like, and I know deep down that he doesn't love me because I wrote rap songs or something, you know, or because I give talks or something. But there is this part of you that, like, you know, kind of comes back to a core question of like, well, what makes me lovable? And you know, I just, it really changed my life to just realize like, oh, you know what? This isn't what God loves me. And yes, I'm doing this because I love God, and it's, you know, I'm motivated interiorly, but like there was some, like, I think, purification for me personally that needed to happen, where I feel like the Lord really did something powerful through that suffering. I don't know what, you know, your ultimate takeaway was with the, you know, when you had the hernia and stuff.
I forgot about it like a month later.
Okay.
I just brought that up to transition.
But for me, it, like, I pulled out of stuff for a while, and I think it was like very pure, like, because I started doing, you know, stuff on stage, like even in college, I was speaking at these conferences and stuff. So it was just like from a young age, I really, like, so much of my relationship with the Lord had to do with what I was doing for him. And then I was a youth minister and all these things. And I heard a quote one time that said, like, you know, Mary and Joseph weren't the only people to lose Jesus at a church, you know. And it's just like this idea that, like, you could be doing all kinds of stuff for the Lord and still lose your faith, you know? So it was like really purifying for me to just kind of say, like, I'm going to pull out of, like, you know, some of the more public stuff I was doing. And it was a really good thing, I think, for me and the Lord. And then just to allow him to kind of build back what he wanted or how he wanted, but realizing all that was secondary. Like, what I did was so much less important than, you know, who I was and that I was loved. It was really purifying. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it almost forced you to make God's love for you an intrinsic reality rather than an extrinsic reality. Like, it forced you to just grapple with it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. You know, like, I feel like I just really kind of came to this realization of, like, man, when I'm before the judgment seat of God, like, probably the last thing he's going to ask me about is, you know, how many songs I wrote for him, or how many, you know, youth groups, or, you know, like, I feel like if he gets to that stuff I did at all, it'll be down the, you know, the main thing he's going to ask me is, like, did you love me? You know, and it's again, it's back to that urgency thing you were talking about. I think we think of urgency a lot of times when it's talking about the other, you know, like, man, I got to get these people in China saved, you know, like, but it's like when you look at, you're like, man, there's some things that I need to, you know, allow the Lord to penetrate my heart today, you know, and not put that off, you know, but sometimes it's harder to recognize the urgency of conversion within ourselves, especially if we're doing church stuff. It's like, well, I already did. Like I know God, and now I'm just one of the worker bees that He wanted. And that's God just wants lovers. He's not looking for like a little ant farm of people in the church that He's just seeing working hard all the time. He wants people to love Him. And that was a really good reality check for me.
Yeah, I can't help but call to mind the story of Ignatius, of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, where it was like maybe not as his was more extreme from like not in his faith at all, but still of like in the battlefield wanted his value in his glory and his value in his status, and not saying that you were at all. This is a more extreme end of the spectrum, but then he took a cannonball to the leg, sat in like an infirmary, and came to his faith in that time. And once he was healed, like retreated to the mountains to fast and pray. But it was the same idea of like, it took this ailment of his body to question his deeper reality, to the point that like the cannonball is the best thing that ever happened to him. He went from who would have been like a minor nobility in Loyola, Spain, to like one of the most influential saints in the church's history.
Yeah, it really is a weird thing how much we rely on ourselves. Like we know as Christians, you're like, well, it doesn't matter, what clothes we wear or how, our body looks. Like we know that those things are superficial, but like at the same time, like we kind of, in a Christian way, we make other things like what our faith is about, like either what we're doing or how many followers we had or how many, how many people were at some talk we gave or, it's like there are other things that actually don't matter as much as we think they do, and when we're stripped of those things, like all of a sudden, like it does make you ask some hard questions, like in regards to your relationship with the Lord, or who you are, what you're living for, and so I think it's surprising, and you always hear people like they'll be like, oh, if I wouldn't change for a second getting cancer because it changed my life, like, and you always like say that sounds so weird, but I obviously it wasn't that, but like in a different way for me, it was like I'm so glad that I had that happen to me in my life, just because it really did change some things that I think I really needed changing.
It's the difference between knowing it in your head and knowing it in your heart.
Sure.
Like I mean, I think the cliche is like most people miss heaven by 8 inches from the head to the heart. It's like if you just connect those two, like I can tell you, God loves me, Jesus loves me, He forgives my sins. But to actually know that can take it can take a painful experience. It can take a stripping away of externality to actually be forced to confront what's really there in front of you.
Do you think your brain is only 8 inches away from your heart?
Yeah, I'm mad stupid. I'm really dumb. Is it 12?
I don't know. I thought it was like 18 or something. Like when you said 8, I was like,
I'm like here.
Yeah, 8. Do you think that's 8 inches?
No, I think it's like a foot. I think we're about there. Audio listeners are real confused right now. Yeah, I'm real.
You're saying 8 inches. I was like, is that how far it is?
That's for people who are like 4'2". I think Peter Dinklage said that. Adage.
Yeah, well, there we go, man. That would make sense. That was who the quote was.
That was his adage.
So funny though. Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I was in a who Bob Rice is? He's a professor at. Anyway, he's a nerdy professor, but he's a musician.
I'm mad dumb. Remember, I'm not.
What's that?
I'm mad dumb. I don't.
Oh yeah, dude, you don't have to.
I think my head.
If you knew who he was, I was gonna say you're a dork. But anyway, he wanted one time. I was in a band with him, and he's like, "What if we called our band 18 inches?" And he's like, "Cause that's how far it is from the head to the heart." And I was like, "No, dude, that's so weird. That's so dumb. We're not gonna call it that."
You were in a band?
Yeah,
I could have guessed that by the everything about you.
It's so funny, man. Yeah, I was in a dorky band with Bob Rice.
So was this pre-Righteous Bee or was this post-Righteous Bee?
This was pre-Righteous Bee.
What kind of band was it?
Dorky band. Like it was like no, it was a fun band. I mean, it was like I don't know, like it was. I mean, rock sounds so dumb, but it was like it was a lot of good musicians, but I would do some rap. I would write some other stuff too, but I was just part of it. You know, I would rap in it, but it was before I did stuff on my own.
Did you rap in, or you play an instrument too?
I rapped and played the guitar.
Okay,
Yeah.
sick. Nice.
But yeah,
I have aspirations to be in a dorky band one day.
Nice, bro.
Yeah.
You look like you could be in a dorky band. Do you play an instrument?
I play drums. Yeah, I could
Okay,
be a
there we
really
go.
dorky drummer.
Dude, that's awesome, man. Yeah, it's so much fun.
Yeah, even
And,
just sitting in the background.
Dude, you could do stuff with the drums, man, where you're a DJ and have a kit, dude. Play along with the beats, bro.
I go silly with it. Yeah,
That'd be really fun. Yeah. Anyways, it seems like this podcast is becoming about you. Like you took it over. And
That's the point. Yeah, the point of it is that we get guests on.
How do we get the attention
I warm
back
them up
on the
I bring up
host?
their medical history, and then I pivot hard. I hard pivot. over
There's always some part in the podcast where you bring up the hernia. You're like, now I wanted to just close out by talking about my hernia, and then it comes back to you.
just start crying. I'm gonna start.
It's
tearing
always a
up
part
one day
they put on some soft music.
and
The
bring
hernia
up-
comes
yeah,
up. The hernia story comes
and
up.
Bring up my minor inconvenience. So I know you had a stroke, but while I was in college, I had a small inconvenience. And we
so
should-
funny, dude. Oh, that's awesome, man.
No, I mean, okay. So to bring it back, the last thing that I really wanted to touch on was, I mean, that we're bringing it way back to culture now. We're back on the culture train.
We're there. All right.
Yeah, we're there. We're home. The marriage of culture and like the church being in modern time, while also having reverence to tradition and not just like flipping everything on its head, and where the balance of that is, or at least how you found it, because it befuddles me. I have no. I mean, I have some idea of it, but it is just something where I feel like I'm always talking to someone who's on one extreme. Either like, nah, man, like the church is now like we can't just be doing what they did in the old times, or people who are like, no, if you play guitar while you like pray, then God loves you less.
Yeah.
And it's like, dang, I wish there was a middle ground.
Yeah, and I think there is, and I think I think you honestly, I mean, just I don't know, talking to you, it sounds like you're probably there, but it is harder. People are drawn to extremes, you know what I mean? Especially when you're trying to be holy, you know, like so like I said, I work at Franciscan University, and there's times like where I gotta like temper the students there, like where I'm like, hey, you gotta chill out a little bit, you know what I mean? But it's just like the idea is like I think like we're like, okay, you're like, I want to be holy, or if you're at an art school, you're like, I want to be the weirdest dude out there. You know, I'm gonna paint myself purple every day, you know, and walk around naked or something, you know. But like people really do that stuff at art schools because they're trying to be as eccentric and out there and different as possible. But like sometimes I think in holiness we're drawn to the same kind of extremes, and the desire is good, you know what I mean, to be radical is probably like a starting point. You know, I feel like it's something it's hard to teach someone to be radical, you know. It's kind of in a lot of ways it's a precursor to being a saint. But if you have that, I feel like and you're patient, you stick with it, most of the time I think the Lord kind of like chills you out a little bit, you know what I mean? Like there's something that happens where you're like, all right, the extremeness that you're kind of taking this to, or the thing that you're like hyper fixating on, you know, whether it's, you know, we need to be on this side or this side, it is actually more about you, you know, like you kind of want this attention, you know, more. But I noticed that like when we just try and stay faithful and we're not so you know, afraid of offending the Lord or doing something wrong. I feel like most of the time that's like in a practical way, that's where people are. It's one thing to over a beer or something like argue about something in the church or the way priests are or the way, you know, altar boys, or I don't know, some like little random thing in the church we get like fixated on. But in practicality, most of the times, you know, like when we have a person in front of you and you're working things, you're like, okay, this probably isn't as important as I thought it was, you know. And I think, and I'm not saying like nothing is important, but I just think like, you know, like when we see, if I think about the Lord, if the Lord was here right now, for instance, here's an example. I was at Mass at my in-laws this past weekend, and this lady walked in, and her and her sister, or who, I don't know if their daughter, like they both had Starbucks like in their hands, you know, and I like was so mad. Like I was like, why would they bring Starbucks into mass? Like I would like tap my wife and we were like, what in the world? Like I was just so angry,
Just flat
you know. And then like as I watch the next couple minutes, I see her like looking around. I could tell like she probably didn't normally go to that church. I mean, for all I know, she was there to hear someone sing in the choir or something. And like all of a sudden your heart starts to soften because you're like, man, what would the Lord do? Would he grab her by the ear and pull her out of church? Like or would he like embrace her like in where she's at? And again, it doesn't mean that doesn't matter. Like, yeah, like everyone should just bring Starbucks, but it does mean that I think sometimes it's easy to miss, the woods to the trees when you're like, man, the Lord wants people's hearts, and that's what, when we talk about the marriage of culture and catechesis or culture evangelization, like that's the point, is that the Lord is able to find his way somehow to our hearts. And most of the time that happens in culture, meaning the things we like, the things we do, and things that are normal and exciting to us. And yeah, I think that's a beautiful, it's a beautiful thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. Thank you so much for this time. This was awesome.
Yeah, man, it's been really fun, and
you have the best tattoos of any guest we've had on.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
The not so close second would be Chevin.
He's got that one on his lower back.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. It's
really nice tattoo.
Yeah. All right. I mean, Bob, thanks so much for being on.
Hey,
here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on, man. It's a cool podcast, and I appreciate being on it. You're a great host.
Thank you. We're keep getting some reps in. When we stop recording, you can tell me all the stuff I did wrong. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and have a great day. And we are
out.